Ranger in Time, Disaster on the Titanic. Chapter 1, Look Out Below. Patrick Murphy hurried through the dark streets of Belfast. If he arrived late for work at the Harland and Wolff shipyard, the gate would be closed. He'd lose his pay for the day. Patrick picked up his pace. When he turned the corner and saw the open gate, his heart filled with relief. He'd made it. Patrick stopped at the Time office, picked up his board, and tucked it into his pocket. The worker number stamped on the small piece of wood ensured that he'd get credit for the hours he'd worked when he turned it in at the end of the day. The yard hummed with activity as men streamed in from all over the city. The shadow of the big ship towered above them. Patrick had grown up in this shipyard, right along with the Titanic. He remembered visiting his father at work when he was a little boy. He'd peek into the big windows of the Harland and Wolff drawing room to watch Mr. Andrews and the other designers making plans for the biggest boats in the world. Patrick longed to stand at the desks with them, imagining and drawing such amazing ships. They started work on the Titanic in 1909 when Patrick was 11. First came the gangtry, a huge structure with cranes, elevators, and walkways. It was the scaffolding from which the men would build. Beneath the gangtry, they laid the great ship's keel. Then came the framing. On the morning of Patrick's 12th birthday, his father had placed 2 pennies in his hand before he left for work. "Hold on to them until I get home," he said. "We'll go out together to buy a sweet treat." That was the day a section of staging collapsed in the shipyard. Patrick's father was killed in the fall. "He's away to the other yard," the shipbuilders whispered. Patrick tucked the pennies in a little cloth pouch. He hid them away in his trunk and promised himself he'd never spend them. But Patrick and his mother needed money to eat, so they went to work in one of Belfast's linen mills. It was dangerous and dusty. Patrick's mother developed a cough. Soon it became so bad she couldn't work anymore. Patrick needed a job that could support both of them. So when he turned 13, he went back to the shipyard where crews continued to work on the Titanic. Patrick joined a riveting team that fastened great steel plates onto the ship's skeleton. But now that work was mostly finished. Patrick took on other jobs, painting and running supplies. Everyone was busy getting ready for the ship's launch, just 2 months away. Sometimes Mr. Andrew himself would tour the shipyard. The pockets of his blue jacket were always stuffed with plans. Patrick wished he could stop work for just a moment on those mornings. He loved to unroll the drawings and talk with the shipbuilder about what he might imagine next. But today there was too much work for daydreaming. "Move along, Murphy," the foreman called. Patrick hurried to his work site. Today they'd start building the shipway, the big ramp that would run up to the ship and under the keel. On launch day, the Titanic would slide down the ramp into the water, and everyone would cheer. "Watch yourself," someone called as a crane unloaded a pile of timbers beside the men. Patrick unhooked the bundle, and the crane's arm rose up to get more. "Over here," the foreman called. One by one, Patrick and the other men lifted the enormous timbers and walked them into place. "More on the way," someone called as the crane's arm swung their way again. Patrick wiped his brow with his sleeve. His stomach growled. How long was it until the morning break? Breakfast was only bread and tea, but it would be better than working on an empty belly. While Patrick waited for the next bundle of timbers, he let his eyes close, just for a moment, and listened. He loved the music of the ship coming to life, the banging and rattling of steel on steel. But then another sound rang out from above, a deep, booming voice. "Look out below!" Chapter 2. All Aboard. "Did you find your life jackets yet?" Mom asked Luke and Sadie. They were getting ready to go for a boat ride with their friends, the Tarars. Not yet, Luke said. I'll look in the shed. Want to come outside with me, Ranger? Ranger barked and followed Luke to the door. Ranger always wanted to go outside. While Luke ran to the shed to look for life jackets, Ranger wandered over to Mom's garden. There was always good smells there. Birds and bugs, plants and dirt, and squirrel. Ranger looked around. There it was, over by the squash plants. Ranger chased the squirrel through the garden. He chased it past the tomatoes and carrots. He chased it across the lawn, around the picnic table, and up a tree. The squirrel sat on a branch, chattering down at him. Nice try, Ranger, Luke said as he walked with the life jackets. Maybe you'll get one next time. Ranger wasn't worried about that. He didn't really want to catch a squirrel anyway. He just loved chasing them. That was why he wasn't an official search and rescue dog. Ranger had gone through lots of special training with Luke and Dad. He'd learned all about helping people who were missing or in trouble. He'd learned how to find people by following their scent. He'd practiced searching on rainy days and windy days. He'd practiced searching in the woods and in buildings. Ranger was very good at finding people and helping, but he was not so good at ignoring squirrels. To pass your search and rescue dog test, you had to ignore everything except the command. You had to ignore hot dogs that people left on lawns. You had to ignore the good smells and birds and squirrels. When Ranger wasn't taking his test, a squirrel had raced. When Ranger was taking his test, a squirrel had raced across the grass right in front of him. Ranger chased it. He knew Luke was just hiding, pretending to be missing. He wouldn't have chased the squirrel if a person was really in trouble, but that didn't matter. Ranger didn't pass his search and rescue dog test, so now he chased squirrels instead. The squirrel wasn't coming down, though, so Ranger went to find Luke. He was in the driveway with his friends Zishan and Noreen. The Tarrar family had just arrived. Luke and Sadie and their parents were loading everything into the car to go to the marina. It's too bad you don't like boats, Ranger, Luke said, giving Ranger a pat on the head. But we won't be gone long. He let Ranger back inside the house, and then the families drove away. Ranger patted around for a while to see if anyone had dropped food before they left. He licked up some cookie crumbs from the kitchen floor. Then he curled up in a patch of sunshine to nap. When Ranger woke, the sunny patch had moved. He went to the mudroom for a drink of water and heard a quiet humming coming from his dog bed. He walked over and pawed at his blanket until he uncovered the first aid kit he'd dug up in Mom's garden on another day. The humming was coming from the old metal box. It was louder now. Ranger knew that sound. He'd heard it before, always when someone needed help. One time, the old first aid kit had transported him to an explorer's ship on a frozen sea. Another time, it had taken him to help a girl in a trembling, fiery city. It had sent him on long, dangerous journeys to a flooded neighborhood and to a battlefield on a faraway beach. All around the first aid kit and Ranger's dog bed were his treasures, gift from the children he met on those journeys. There was an old quilt square from a boy named Sam, a feather from a girl named Sarah, and a purple bandana from Claire, a girl in the flood. Now the first aid kit was humming again. Ranger nuzzled the worn leather strap over his head, and the humming got louder. The box grew warm at his throat. Light spilled from the cracks. It grew brighter and brighter until Ranger had to close his eyes. He felt as if he were being squeezed through a hole in the sky, and then the box was quiet. Ranger opened his eyes. New sounds pounded in his ears, clanging and banging, crashing and rattling, deep voices shouting. The air smelled of sawdust and steel, paint and sweat, and the sea. Above him, a huge machine creaked and swung its metal arms. A messy heap of wooden boards dangled overhead. They looked as if they might wiggle loose at any second. Men rushed everywhere, carrying paint buckets, tools, and lumber. In the middle of it all, a boy a little older than Luke stood with his eyes closed. Then there was a terrible cracking sound from above, and the voice bellowed, "Look out below!"